Hello and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we're talking about the big uglies up front. That's right, the offensive line. Look, it's a fantasy football podcast. We're going to spin and talk about all the skill position players that you all know, but come on now. I cannot stress enough the importance of the offensive line. They never get enough credit for having, other than the QB, arguably the most influence on the entire offense. And in fantasy land, we want good offenses. So pay attention, people, because I am thrilled to have on a former NFL lineman himself to talk about arguably the most important position group on the field. 5-year former NFL pro. You probably heard him all over the place in this industry, particularly on his namesake pod, Ross Tucker. Ross, thanks for coming on, man. How's it going?
Ian, my pleasure. It was awesome when you came on the Fantasy Feast podcast a couple weeks ago. You absolutely killed it. You had good numbers. I love the A.J. Brown stuff. It was fantastic. Anybody missed it, make sure you go back a couple weeks ago and check out Ian on my Fantasy Feast podcast. But yeah, here's what I always say about the O-line. I think it is the deciding factor if it's a tie between two dudes, right? Like when it comes to drafting and you're like, man, I don't know about this guy versus this guy, and you're going back and forth, go with the one with the better O-line. Like if you're legitimately torn, it can be the tiebreaker. O-lines can be the tiebreaker. And I have found it becomes very helpful because there's a lot of times where you're torn between two guys. When you're torn, go with the better O-line because that gives them a much better chance to succeed.
I think people are willing to take that approach with quarterbacks, but you're right. But the offensive line, that has just as good a chance of sinking an entire offense. So, be careful. Like even the Browns last year, the hype was out of control. One thing we kind of point to maybe being questionable was that offensive line, and turned out to be the case there at least. So, okay, everyone, two main themes today. I'm going to talk up some offensive line continuity, returning starters from 2019, and then simply some of the league's best and worst units. So quickly, how we're determining a starter from last year, if they played at least 50% of the offense's snaps or were a week one starter. So with that said, the following teams have all 5 offensive linemen back: the Cardinals, Falcons, Bills, Texans, Colts, Jaguars, Raiders, and Rams. Now, Ross, there's a difference between continuing a great offensive line and a bad offensive line, and that's the struggle here and the worry I have with the Rams because, they regressed big time in 2019. This was a line where Gurley went out at the end of the season. C.J. Anderson walked in. It was like nothing changed. Goff was setting all kinds of efficiency marks. It was incredible, but whole offensive line's back. Re-signing Andrew Whitworth, the only upgrade they made in the entire unit was a 7th-round pick. Do you think Sean McVay is enough of a genius to make this work, even though we probably shouldn't expect much of an improvement across the front?
So it's a good question. And I will say in general for this year, Ian, and I've been saying this on all my podcasts, I am very much leaning towards teams that have continuity and chemistry in general, right? Like, you've got the head coach and coordinators back. You've got the same quarterback. You got a lot of veterans back, right? So we know that there's abbreviated training camp, limited practice time, and talent still matters, but I am fading as a general rule. Look, there's always exceptions, but as a general rule, fading rookies. I'm fading teams with new quarterbacks, fading teams with a bunch of new guys on the offensive line or elsewhere. And it's especially true on the offensive line because it's really the only position group where at least 75% of the time, in some way, shape, or form, you are working in concert with one of the guys next to you.
Yeah.
Anything else in life, the more often you do it, the more familiar you are with the guy, the better you'll be, the more comfortable you'll be. So often you need to know when he's going to leave in pass pro. You need to know on the double teams at the point of attack when you're going to feel for it and go up to the linebacker. You just kind of get that sense like anything else in life. And so I like the teams that have all 5 guys back. For the Rams, it really comes down to the development of the young guys. So that's Brian Allen back at center, David Edwards and Noteboom and Bobby Evans, Austin Corbett, Havenstein and Whitworth are going to be the tackles, right? Like we know that. Pretty confident Brian Allen's the center. And then for the guards, you've got Blythe, who got to a Super Bowl with them, Corbett, who they traded for last year. But then these other guys, Notebloom and Edwards, it's either year two or year 3 for all these guys. It's time, right? Now, I know they haven't had OTAs in minicamp, but it's time. They basically, first of all, they didn't have a lot of money to spend. But secondly, they decided, you know what? We've invested a lot of mid-round picks in these dudes. We're going to have 4 of them battle it out. And I just mentioned 4 or 5, depending on what they do with Bobby Evans. We got these guys battling it out, and we need 1 or 2 to step up and show that they can play competently.
Yeah.
And I think that they got a shot. I really do. None of those guys was great last year, but they were kind of in and out of the lineup, moving guys around, trying to figure out the best group. I think if they can figure that out, which maybe that's tough with no preseason games, but figure it out and let Whitworth and the guy next to him, whether that's Corbett or not, really start to develop a rapport. Let the right guard, probably Blythe, but they'll let those other guys compete, establish a rapport as well. Because really, the only differences between 2018 and 2019 were really the center and the left guard. No more Saffold and Sullivan. They went young, and it backfired. But I also say that the returning guys, Blythe and Havenstein, they were not as good on the right sideline. So they need those guys to get back to their 2018 form.
Yeah. Good stuff, man. We did see the Rams, I think, as that season went on. McVay realized that it wasn't the same group of world beaters. After their bye week, we saw them really get away from that 3 wide receiver, just almost all the time offense, using so much more Tyler Higbee, just pretty much coming to grips with the fact they needed to, help out their 5 offensive linemen. So would not count out Sean McVay by any stretch. And as you said, man, they must feel pretty good about this group if they're bringing the dudes back. So staying in this division, I want to talk about the Cardinals because they were an interesting case last year. PFF, a lot of studies we've done, a lot of the pressures we chalk up end up being the quarterback's fault more so than the offensive line. That's particularly true with Kyler Murray. Only Deshaun Watson and Jacoby Brissett have more pressures attributed to a quarterback other than Kyler Murray. And look, the run game in Arizona was fantastic. They have all 5 starters back. It's a situation where they didn't all these offensive line grades and stuff. They didn't grade out all that great, but I think, when you watch Kyler last year, got better as the year went on with handling pressure, was a little, happy feet early on. It seems like a situation where they could take the next step, but I'm just a little concerned. I'm not the first person to bring up the 2020 Cardinals look like the 2019 Browns. We saw what sank the Browns last year, and it was that offensive line. Do you think the Cardinals are sound enough up front to kind of be the fun, sleep, hype team everyone wants them to be?
I do, and I'll tell you why. They've essentially added 3 guys. So even though they have all 5 starters back, Humphreys, Pugh, Mason Cole, Sweezy, and Marcus Gilbert, well, really Justin Murray. They've got Gilbert back after the injury last year. Then they signed Kelvin Beachum, and they drafted Josh Jones in the 3rd round out of Houston. Some people thought he could be a first-round pick. So in my mind, I'm big on depth. I'm big on having guys that can be in there competing. And so they actually have now a bunch of good competition, especially at the tackle spots. Humphreys is good, but they've got guys that can battle it out at right tackle. And I think they feel like between Murray and Jones and Gilbert, they're going to get competent play at right tackle, which was the biggest concern for them last year. My issue is really the interior depth. Max Garcia better be ready to go because if Pugh or Cole or Sweezy gets hurt, they don't have a lot of experience behind them. That would probably be Garcia would be the guy that they would put in there. But I do think I don't think that they're as bad as the Browns O-line last year at all. I think it's a fair comparison, but I think they got a better group up front this year than the Browns had a year ago.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair and great points about the guys they added. Now let's stick on the Browns here because this is an offensive line that, pretty much the reason why things did not work out for them last year if you had to go to it. Now, Baker needed to be better and when he was kept clean and all that too, but the offensive line was the root of those issues. We probably should have known something was up when they released Greg Robinson, like right after the preseason, only to sign him back. I know it was like a cost-saving move and some clever finances, but it's not good to be having that approach to your starting left tackle. Good news is they've signed Jack Conklin. They drafted Jedrick Wills with the number 10 overall pick. this is the kind of prime post-hype team we're looking at in Cleveland. Do you think the offensive line is now good enough for them to be the team this year that everyone thought they were going to be in 2019?
So they've clearly upgraded with Jedrick Wills at left tackle, Conklin at right tackle. I even like Nick Harris in the 5th round. I thought that was a good pick, the center out of UW. And now what they have too is with Chris Hubbard, that's an awesome 3rd tackle. And Chris could even play guard if they need him to, if something happened to Batonio or I mean, Chris Hubbard's about as good of a 6th man as there is in the league. So the concern there would be how much are they going to throw it? And I think with Stefanski, it's going to be a lot of the Kubiak stuff, a lot of the boot stuff. I think Jack Conklin will perform well there. I don't think Conklin's the guy you want just doing straight drop back passing all the time. He's better in the run game, better in the play action stuff. I'd be lying, Ian, if I didn't say I'm not a little bit concerned with Jedrick Wills on the left side. I mean, evidently he played right tackle in high school, certainly played right tackle at Alabama. I know he's been working on it a lot, but it's muscle memory, man. I mean, I'm sure he's been in a left-handed stance. I'm sure he's been going against bags, maybe even some dudes from back home he can find, just lighten him up a little bit like I used to back in high. I used to go back. I used to literally, Ian, right before training camp, I'd go to my high school field with the high school team, and I would line up 2 kids at each spot because my whole thing was I could play all 5, right? Yeah. So I'd line up 2 high school kids at each spot, and I would do one-on-ones, me against those 10, and just go center, right guard, right tackle, boom. And like they're high school kids, but they were lighter, like so they can move around, like they can make you move your feet. You have to jack them up. I would just work on different things. Hopefully Wills has time because they say there might be 8 to 14 padded practices. That's not a lot of time in a left-handed stance. You know, it's a different fit, right? When you're punching somebody, when you're getting in there on a double team, everything's just a little bit different. So I think they're going to have a good offensive line. I think if they struggle, if they have any issues, it'll be early, but that they'll get better and better as the season goes. And I said this with everybody. I love when you have a 6-man like Hubbard. That guy's going to end up starting 8 games probably for you when somebody goes down, and he'll be able to plug right in and play fine.
Yeah, it's a good point. Just how many practices are they going to have to truly get this right? And along with the Browns, these are teams returning 3 or fewer starters from last year. We also have the Broncos, Lions, Giants, Seahawks, Panthers, Chargers, Dolphins, and Jets. And I want to focus real quick, though, one more thing on the Browns here. I agree with everything you said there, but I mean, Baker Mayfield, and, we had Evan Silva on the first episode here talking quarterbacks. And one thing Evan brought up about Baker was this kind of issue we've seen with him going back to his days at Oklahoma, where he, even when the pocket is clean, sometimes he just has a tendency to try to roll out right, get away from pressure. It was a lot easier against Big 12 defenses than against defensive ends that are much faster than him. But do you buy into the idea that, this young quarterback that's faced a lot of pressure early on can, quote unquote, get spooked and just kind of struggle to play within the scheme, even once they do improve the protection around him?
So great point. So first of all, I love what you said about the Cardinals, about Kyler Murray. And what I like about Kyler Murray is he admitted that this offseason. He said a lot of those sacks, a lot of those pressures, that was on me. I love that. That's called being a leader. He was a rookie. That's going to happen. You'd rather have him taking sacks that he shouldn't and getting hit when he shouldn't, as opposed to throwing picks. And so I thought that spoke well of Kyler Murray. But Baker Mayfield, I was pretty disappointed. It's almost like, Ian, everybody talked so much about how bad the O-line was that he got that in his head. And there'd be times where he had a clean pocket and everything was good, and he would start to run out to the right, start to roll around. And the thing is he's not really athletic enough to do that. He's just not. He needs to be more Drew Brees and less Russell Wilson. Yeah. That's what I would tell Baker Mayfield. He's accurate. He's smart, I think. You got to be Drew Brees, bro. You're not going to – Russell Wilson, I've never seen anything like it. I mean – D lineman can't touch him when he's like running around back there. Baker, that's not you, bro.
Yeah.
It's just not. He needs to be more like Drew Brees. I think Stefanski will be able to do a pretty good job of letting him know that. I also think Baker throws the ball on the move pretty well and seems to me like he'd be a good fit for a lot of the boot action, play action stuff they want to do as opposed to just the drop back passing. I think, if they get that zone game going with Chubb and Hunt and start throwing it off of that, I think Baker can have a great year. I mean, look what Kirk Cousins did last year. I think Baker's a more talented quarterback. And so I'd be excited if I were a Browns fan because I think Stefanski's the real deal.
Exciting year for sure, but I mean, some of those points you brought up are why Baker is honestly at the top of my fade list in fantasy land, just because he's still being drafted, people, almost as his borderline QB1, and he's probably going to be in more of a run-first offense this year than we saw, and with no rushing floor to speak of, we're just going to need a massive efficiency hike, and, he was outside the top 30 QBs when it was a clean pocket last year, and hey, should be a better situation, third-year QB, room to improve, but I am not buying him, near the ceiling that we've seen before right now. So moving on, another team, 3 or 4 returning starters, Los Angeles Chargers. Now, I found a cool stat with these guys because I've been fascinated with the idea that, a rushing QB can really help open up a team's run game. And so I was looking at yards before contact per rush team-wide. And here are the top 4 teams the last 5 years. Your 2019 Cardinals with Kyler Murray, 2019 Ravens with Lamar Jackson. And then we have your 2015 and 2016 Bills with Tyrod Taylor under center. Ross, could you explain the benefits of, having a rushing QB and like how that can help, really help streamline an elite offensive line?
Yeah. So first of all, that's awesome that you got those numbers and those stats. That makes perfect sense to me. And so having a quarterback that adds the running element does 2 things. Number one, it takes away the defense's number count advantage, right? So typically, you have, let's say you have 7 blockers, right? Or 6 blockers. You got the offensive line and a tight end, and then you got the running back, and then you've got the quarterback. Well, they're going to have 7 guys down there in that situation. Even if you have 2 tight ends and a running back or a tight end fullback and the running back, they're going to always have one more guy than you do because they want to have an unblocked defender. Well, if they have to account for the quarterback, he's really not unblocked. I mean, there might not be somebody physically hitting him, but somebody has to account for the quarterback. So many of those runs where it's the zone read option, those type of plays, they're not blocking one guy because they're making that guy accountable for the quarterback. What that does, Ian, is that gives the O-line awesome angles, absolutely awesome angles, because you can essentially work back a guy because the quarterback's holding the guy on the front side or the back side, depending on the play. So that doesn't surprise me at all. And really, the quarterback doesn't even have to run that much. Mm-hmm. We're going to get to the point in the NFL where teams are going to realize they only need that guy to run 2 to 4 times per game. 2 to 4 is enough that the defense has to honor it every time, and you don't have to get that guy beat up. You look at some of the holes that the Ravens have, some of the angles they get. I mean, I remember last year doing a game, you watch the end zone copy of the Ravens, there's plays where Lamar Jackson comes out with the ball or a running back, there's nobody there. I mean, Nick Boyle, the tight end's looking around like there's not even anybody here. I mean, because that's the other thing. It's the angles. It's having the guy have to be accounted for, so the number count advantage, but you're also able to do a bunch of things scheme-wise that defenses haven't seen that often. So it's all of those. It's having to account for them, the angles that creates, but also the new schemes that they're not used to because the quarterback's a run threat.
And this is exactly why I've been trying to keep people on the Austin Ekeler train. Yes, it sucks Rivers left to the extent that he's not going to catch 9 touchdowns again next year. He's not going to catch over 90 balls probably. But Also, Eckler's #1 competition for carries left in Melvin Gordon. He's going to be the lead back of an improved rushing attack, and he can still, Tyrod's plenty fine enough to throw the ball out to Ekeler when he's open as well. Keep buying Austin Ekeler, everyone. All right, awesome stuff on some of the continuity. Now, want to look at some of the league's best and worst units. Now, Ross, I know you've got your, rankings coming out here soon. If you haven't released them already, PFF just released ours earlier in July, and the top 5 we came up with: Colts, Saints, Cowboys, Packers, and Ravens. Now, all these, now specifically the Colts, Packers, and Ravens. In fantasy land, these are tough because we have multiple backs in all these backfields. We know the offensive line is good. We know the offenses should be pretty good. Do you see these rushing games being dominant enough to enable multiple high-end fantasy backs? And I'm talking about, again, the Colts, Packers, and Ravens.
So I think that they're all, the Packers really want to run the rock. Based on, taking A.J. Dillon in the second round, what the Packers think they need to do to have success. They also didn't draft any wide receivers. Mm-hmm. So that part of it's pretty clear. I have them number 3. I think the Packers O-line's really good. Yeah. Ours is similar, actually. I had Colts 1, Saints 2. What I like about the Colts is they got the same 5 guys back. That's huge. And what I like about Saints are probably the most talented. But, you got Cesar Ruiz in the first round coming in for Warford. We'll see. We'll see how a rookie does with very limited practices, right? That's a little bit of a risk that they're taking there. Really like the Packers. I thought Elston Jenkins for a rookie last year at left guard was excellent. Right guard still a little bit questionable. We'll see how Ricky Wagner does at right tackle, but I still like the Packers quite a bit. And that's what they want to do. I think the Colts are going to want to run the ball. I don't think they want to rely that much on Rivers' arm. So to answer your question, I don't know if they can have 2 dominant fantasy rushing attacks, but I do think the rushing attack can be dominant enough that the lead dog is still a big dog, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So I don't care what they say, between Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor, one of those guys is going to emerge and get more of the carries, more of the touches. And even if the other guy is getting a third, right, or a quarter for Mack or Taylor. And then same thing for the Packers. Although I don't know, I'm curious to see how much they actually use A.J. Dillon this year. I'm fascinated by that. I almost wonder if they got him primarily because they don't want to pay Aaron Jones, and they kind of wanted a banger of a back, and they wanted to get ahead of the game, envisioning losing Jones in free agency next year.
If they want to go with Jones as the lead back that also takes all the pass down work and Dillon as more the early down guy, I get that. I don't understand when I hear LaFleur talking about, how they need that third back to get over the hump and, implying Williams is still going to be as involved as ever. So yeah, Packers is one of, just the biggest question marks that we're going to want to pay more attention to that week 1 snap counts than ever. All right, last thing on this point, the Ravens. This was literally the most efficient rushing attack we've ever seen, just in terms of yards per carry in a single season. Everyone's back. We talk about continuity from the coaching staff to Lamar to the line. I know Marshall Yanda retired, but other than that, man, they're all the way back. We would expect them to regress to some extent because it's so hard to be that good again. But it's hard to find a reason why the Ravens aren't going to be a top 5 offense again next year, right?
Well, they're going to be a top 5 offense, but I'll say a couple of things. Number 1, Yanda was still awesome last year. Yeah. So losing him, that hurts. And they've got DJ Fluker and Bredesen and Phillips and Powers. We talked earlier about some teams throwing mid-round picks at it. The Ravens have thrown a bunch of mid-round picks at the guard positions. They want to try to make sure they're good to go there. They knew Yanda was going to retire at any point. So I like the fact that they've done that, but they're going to be a drop-off. There's going to be a drop-off at right guard. The other thing I think is interesting, I love Greg Roman. Ian, I think he's a genius. Seeing what they do with the run scheme last year, I absolutely love it. But you got to think this whole offseason, the coronavirus, what do these D coordinators do other than in the AFC North in particular, other than study the Ravens running game, talk to college guys? I'm not saying they're going to shut it down. They're not. I don't think it's shut down a bull. I really don't. But I think they're going to have a better plan, and they're going to do a better job against it, like the Titans did in the divisional round. I thought Greg Roman got away from the run a little bit too early in that game. I thought the Titans had an awesome plan for early down and distance, and it worked, and they slowed down the Ravens' rushing attack quite a bit. And Ravens better figure it out, because people are going to do that exact same thing to them that the Titans did with more or less like a 6-1 defense until the Ravens prove that they can handle it. So there will be regression for multiple reasons, but I still picture them, in the top 5, maybe just not the most efficient rushing offense we've ever seen.
Exactly. There's just not much room to go up at this point. So another highly rated front, 49ers, PFF has them as the league's 8th best offensive line. Man, they lost their longtime left tackle, Joe Staley, but they might have just upgraded at the position depending on what Trent Williams can provide at this point in his career. I mean, we talk about can defenses figure out what the Ravens are doing from last year, this year. Well, no one's really been able to figure out what Kyle Shanahan's doing in the run game the entire time he's been calling plays. Any reason to believe the 49ers won't be a top-tier offense again in 2020?
No, not really. They get Richburg back at center. So as long as he's healthy, that's an upgrade over what they had late in the year with Ben Garland. I think right guard is a position to watch, because they cut Mike Person, who later retired. So I think they got some young guys they like School and Brunskill, who might even have a chance to get in there at guard along and battle with Compton. But there could be a little bit of a downgrade there. But yeah, man, I mean, who loses Joe Staley after all these years to retirement, and then you replace him with Trent Williams? It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. And I think it gives them a chance to have the line be every bit as good as they were last year. I have them at 7 in my rankings, because really, if you think about it, Person was up and down last year. So even if that's a net negative or about even, they have Trent, I think, is going to be an upgrade because he wants to get paid. And Richburg's an upgrade. Yeah. I think the Niners offensive line ends up even being better than they were last year.
Yeah, it's a situation, too, where I think we're being a little too harsh on Jimmy G and, what he did last year. First year coming off an ACL tear, and I realized the first part of the season he didn't have to do anything because they were just running the ball. Same thing that happened in the playoffs. They just did not need him. But second half of that season, Jimmy G was actually putting up some numbers. I mean, only Lamar had more 4 passing touchdown games on the season than Jimmy G did last year. I mean, he's one of the prime late-round quarterbacks out there right now. He's not going to give you a bunch of rushing upside, but there's a reason he's going as the QB 20. Feel free to buy there. Okay, PFF bottom 5 offensive lines. We have the Seahawks, the Washington football team, Chargers, Bengals, and Dolphins. I want to focus on those latter 2 teams because they're the ones with the new rookie quarterbacks coming in, seemingly vying to start in week 1, Joe Burrow and Tua. Man, these were 2 pretty brutal offensive lines last year, but both of these quarterbacks are special enough to seemingly make some noise as early as 2020. Do you think either or the Bengals and Colts are strong enough up front to, help out these rookie signal callers in 2020?
So I have the Bengals 32. I have them as the worst offensive line in the NFL. I feel bad for Joe Burrow. It's a really bad recipe. You've got a rookie quarterback, number 1. Number 2, no OTAs, no mini camps, no preseason games, very little padded practices for not only his familiarity with the offense and the skill guys, but for the offensive line in front of him. I know they get Jonah Williams back, but you look at the other positions. Michael Jordan, below average. Billy Price or Michael Jordan, below average. Trey Hopkins, average. Suafilo, below average. Bobby Hart, below average. And Jonah Williams is like a rookie. He didn't play last year. He was hurt. Didn't play a snap. So they're 32. They're easily 32. And, it's weird that they upgraded the defense, like DJ Reader and Trey Waynes and Mackenzie Alexander. But you don't improve the O-line. Like, you don't get anybody better on the O-line when they knew they were getting a rookie quarterback. I don't get it. And I think it's one reason why I don't know if Burrow even lasts the season. He's going to get the snot beat out of him. I love Joe Burrow, but that's rough. Dolphins are a little bit different. they got a lot of dudes coming in now. You know, Bengals don't have any. I mean, Jonah Williams is the only real upgrade,
Right.
and that's just because he was hurt. The Dolphins take Austin Jackson in the first round, Solomon Kinley in the fourth round, Ted Karras they get in free agency from New England. He's solid. You got Dieter back, but you also added Robert Hunt in the second round. So Hunt and Kinley are going to be battling Dieter to be the guards. You got those three guys battling for the 2 guard spots. Jesse Davis was okay last year at tackle. Maybe he battles with Davenport. I think maybe Austin Jackson, the first round, plays. I just think that there's enough resources put in on Miami's part that, look, they're not going to be worse than they were last year. I mean, they were bad last year. They were really bad. They're not going to be worse than they were last year, bringing in 1, 2, 3, 4 new guys like that. So I like that. I mean, it's not continuity. It'll take them a little bit of time, but they really didn't lose anybody up front, and they're adding 4 pretty good resources to try to grow that. So might take a couple of weeks to sort it out, both the competition part of it and those guys, their feel for each other. But I had them at 25 because I believe that they will be significantly better than they were last year. I mean, the difference between being the 32nd offensive line and 25th is a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, 32nd, you stink, you're poor. 25th, you're just below average.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
It seems like the Dolphins and the Jets almost just took a page out of the Bills book, because the Bills, I mean, brutal offensive line, first season with Josh Allen, and what they do going into last year, they just threw a bunch of resources at the position, and now they finally have the continuity to help build things out. We'll see. And yeah, man, like that was the problem with the Bengals. It's not like anyone looked at that offensive line and said, oh, they're one player away from being this great unit. As awesome as Jonah Williams might be, there are just more issues there. I've been really high on Joe Burrow throughout this process, but starting to move him down just a little bit. I mean, if it was more of a regular season, that'd be one thing, but with these issues, with the O-line, I mean, starting off the year, Chargers, Browns, Eagles, Ravens, Colts, Jaguars thrown in there, not easy lines to deal with.
And not only that, Ian, LSU's offensive line was awesome last year.
Yeah.
Like they all went pro. They were all, I mean, you go right down, it's like Cushenberry and Damian Lewis. Like he had a lot of time last year. It's going to be a different ball game. It's like you're going against Steelers defense, the Ravens, now that they got guys like Calais Campbell to go with Judon. I mean, it's going to be rough, bro. I'm just telling you, it's going to be rough for Burrow. And I love Burrow, but
No, I hear you, man. Again, that's why with these players, keep in mind that offensive line, people. It can take a great player to average in a hurry. So, Ross, that's all I have, man. You are awesome. Everyone, make sure you go follow Ross on Twitter at Ross Tucker NFL and check out the Feast Ross Tucker podcast. Ross, anything else you want to plug, man?
No, that's it. At Ross Tucker NFL on all the social media platforms. All the podcast stuff is at Ross Tucker Pod. And you mentioned the Fantasy Feast. I got a new YouTube page. Putting up some cool videos there, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Other than that, make sure you check out Ian's appearance on the Fantasy Feast because he killed it.
Check that out, everyone. Thank you again, Ross. And for Ross, I'm Ian. Take care.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.